Welcome to the Author Blurb podcast. Here, we're here to connect readers and authors so that the readers, you, can find that book or that author you're going to love. So I appreciate you being here. Get ready, enjoy the show, enjoy knowing the authors, and remember, subscribe, tell people about the show, and go buy the author's books, because if you like listening to them and you think they're interesting, they're going to love hearing from you. So I'm here with Michael Wiley, and we're talking about his 4 series that he has. Michael, I appreciate you being on. Hopefully I pronounced your last name correctly, because as anybody that's watched the show well knows, I do have a habit of messing up names. So I do appreciate
I
you
will
being
answer
on.
to anything. I will answer to anything, and I have answered to anything. So thank you. Thanks, Eric, for having me.
So you have a pretty nice list of books, it looks like, and the mystery thriller section of your genre. I want to get to know more about it. You just had a book come out not too long ago. Remind me, I want to say The Tough One, but it's The Tough Guy. Am I thinking correctly?
No, it's called The Long Way Out.
The Long Way Out. I don't know why I was thinking that, but
Well, there's a kind of a tough guy in it. You know, he's a pretty tough guy. He's beaten into toughness.
Perfect. Well, at least I have the character description right. So with that being said, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your books, and we can talk more and get to find out more about these so that people can discover your books and discover which series they really want to dive into.
Sure, thanks. And again, thanks for having me, Eric. I've written, as you say, 4 series, and that sounds like an awful lot of books, but each of the series, 3 of the series have 3 books, and the 4th series is one that I'm just getting going on, and that has 2 so far. And so it's really more like 3 trilogies plus 2 out of 3 of a trilogy. In the 4th one, I write 2 different kinds of books. I write private eye books, and I have 2 series of 3 in that. One featuring a Chicago private investigator named Joe Kosmarski. And if you think my name is hard to remember or to pronounce, Kosmarski gets mangled. That was one of those names that I realized that maybe, you know, that was my first series. And I realized afterwards that, you know, Chicago has a huge Polish American population. And I wanted to make this guy a very Chicago kind of a guy. And so I called him Kosmarski. But again, a lot of people, you know, we'll just call him Joe. And he's a private investigator, you know, very, very familiar to a lot of us in terms of the wisecracking, you know, very familiar type of a person. And that's a series that won the Seamus Award for Best Novel, the 3rd of those books, called A Bad Night's Sleep. And that was the one that got me into the genre, which is a genre that I've loved since I was a child. After that one, I decided I grew up in Chicago and lived there for the first, nearly 30 years of my life. And then I moved to New York with my soon-to-be wife and got a graduate degree in English literature. I'd been trying to make it as a freelance writer in Chicago, not very successfully. So I went there to get more schooling so I could, you know, teach, and also so I could make some New York contacts. And so lived in New York for 7 years, came back to Chicago for 3, and that's when I started writing the first of the series. And then got a job teaching full-time at University of North Florida in Jacksonville, Florida. And so the first series and the 3rd series are books that are set in Chicago, you know, a place that is, you know, a wonderful one to set hard-boiled fiction, which is my kind of crime fiction. And then the other series, the 2nd series I started writing, is set down here in the southeastern United States. And the main character in that, or the character it all revolves around, is a homicide detective named Daniel Turner. And he's not real central to the stories, but he always plays a significant part in investigating and solving the crimes. But they're all told by other characters, and he just keeps on coming in. So it's an unusual approach. I wrote 3 in that series. before going back to Chicago for a guy named Sam Kelson, one of my favorite characters. He's disinhibited. He had a head injury and now is a frontal lobe kind of an injury, and he cannot keep himself from speaking the thoughts that cross through his mind. He's going to tell the truth as he knows it all the time. And so he's a private investigator, once again, but a private investigator who can't keep secrets. He cannot keep things private. And so, whether a cop, who asks him a question about an investigation that they're competing on, or a criminal asks a question, he's going to respond to it one way or another. And so, again, this is hard boiled, but there's also a kind of a comic edge. He's somebody that I view as maybe closest to myself, somebody who sometimes can be less inhibited than I should be. And then the final series, and the one that just, the second book just has come out, A Long Way Out. That's based on a guy, again, set in Jacksonville. Young man, he was 18 years old when a horrific crime was committed. Two boys were killed. He was accused of the crime, and he was sent to prison where he spent 8 years. He did not commit the crime. And so the first of these in this series is called Monument Road. And Monument Road has him newly out of prison. He got exonerated through one of the justice initiatives that investigated crimes that clearly injustices had occurred. And he's newly out, and he's investigating the crime that sent him to prison and the cop who seemed obsessed with sending him there. And so that's the first one. And I wrote that thinking that was going to be a standalone, that was just going to be a one-off. But what I ended up doing, it sold well, and it got a lot of good attention. And my publisher asked me if I would return to Frankie. Frankie Dast is the name of the character. And so after Monument Road, I then returned to him with The Long Way Out, where he's investigating a different set of crimes.
All right. Now, so let's start with Chicago, then we'll move down to the southern parts of America's novels. So we'll just start from north down to south. So the first one, Joe, because, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the last name. And I'd say this, if you have your books in an audible form or audiobook, I really feel sorry for the narrator on that. Because just trying to picture pronouncing that name multiple times would probably be crazy. But with that there, what was it that got you started writing that? I mean, I understood you had the urge to write, but there's tons of genres out there to write about, or write in at least. There's all sorts of things to kind of work with. You could have done fantasy, which is a huge market, sci-fi. I mean, what made you decide that crime was the area you enjoy? Because don't get me wrong, I enjoy a good crime story and it's fun, but it also takes a special person to write and think about those type of things.
Right. For reasons I don't fully understand, from the time that I was very young, I was fascinated by crime stories. I grew up in a household of readers. My mother was a one-a-night mystery reader herself. And so I think that there's a part of it might be genetic. But I grew up and I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And, while other kids were reading Boy's Life or whatever highlights, whatever wholesome, fair, kids that age read, I was a subscriber to Ellery Queen's mystery magazine and just loved these stories, loved the 2-minute mysteries where, it was about a page and a half and you had to solve whatever mystery was put forward. I had the true crime going as well. So I had a big anthology of true stories from the FBI and, read about Ma Barker and Al Capone. And I just, I loved that kind of stuff, from a very young age. By the time I was in high school, though, already knowing that I loved to write and I loved to read, I caught the bug that I think a lot of us do, which is one in which, you're told, well, the crime writing isn't serious. The real serious stuff, the real stuff has the capital L, literature.
Mm.
And so I turned to that, and again, I teach literature as well as creative writing as a professor, and I love that work as well. But that was the kind of writing that I thought I needed to do, and so I tried that, and wasn't very good at it, and tried harder, and still wasn't very good at it. Tried still harder, wasn't very good at it. And so again, after graduating from college, I tried to make a living both writing fiction and journalism, and doing whatever would bring me in a little bit of money, and it was tough. And so I thought, what, maybe I'm just better at the other kinds of stuff. That's when I went to graduate school. It was only after later on that I came back and I realized, what, that whether it has a capital L or a low L for literature, whether you're reading it on the beach or you're reading it in a library, whether it's been around for 300 years or 3 hours, the difference between stories is there are some stories that are strong and interesting and good, and ones that we want to say, I want to read this, and then there's the other ones, there's the ones, it doesn't take that capital L, and so with that, I suddenly realized that what, I'm going to write that stuff that I really, really also just love. And I turned back to that. So it's a lifelong love. It's a lifelong love, but it took me a while to come back to that first love.
All right. Now, with your stories, starting with the ones in Chicago is your first series, the one with Joey with the unpronounceable last name. With him, he's a private eye, a PI. Do you really dive into the details? Is it okay, this is what I know about the private eye industry field, and you stick with those generalisms and just go with that and create the story off of those?
Yeah. As somebody who also has the academic hat that I wear, somebody who writes, I've got a couple of books of literary criticism that's historically based. I love research. I just love research. And so I want whenever possible, I want to have the details right. And so everything I've ever written, I've taken the research part of it very seriously. And so interviewing people, going out to the places where I set the books I set, finding out the details. If there's a gun involved, I'm going to understand the details of how that gun differs from any other gun. I'm going to understand all of the details that I can. And when it comes down to any, I think, especially prose fiction, any kind of novel, the book or the story comes first for me. The story, the characters, the settings are going to come first. And so, if press, if there's an either or, get it historically, professionally, exactly right versus the story. If I'm in a situation that it's got to be one or the other, the story is going to win every time.
All right.
But it's rare. It's rare that it has to come that way. And so the answer really is both. I love the genre. I love what goes on in it. And I'm always paying attention to that. That's part of the research too. But I know the field. I know the field.
All right. Now, what kind of writing, I guess, is the best way of asking the question, in the sense of, do you do your stories, and if it's different book series work differently for you, let me know. But like, I know some of the books I read, they're trying to be a steady, fast pace with a couple down times to let you breathe. Others are more of, they build you up and then they get you going and slow down and build back up, kind of a pace.
Sure.
How do you take the readers along in your stories, so that, is it just a lot of adrenaline rush? Is it the car chases the whole premise of it, or is it you're building up to something?
Yeah, the car chase definitely isn't the whole premise of it, but there is a car, right? The biggest division is between the Chicago books and the southeastern United States books. The Chicago books, my sense of Chicago is there's a kind of a clip to the way that people move, maybe because it's those cold winters. There's a kind of a hardness, there's a fastness, there's a kind of irony, and those books, and again, those are my two series. There are both PI books, both set very focused on the PI, and those move fast. The book that won the Seamus, A Bad Night's Sleep, I decided that what I was going to do in that is I was going to try to basically if I could take the starting point and I could shoot as straight as an arrow as possible to the end, that's what I was going to do. Just kind of increasing the speed and increasing the pleasures as we go along. The ones I set in Northeast Florida and the area are thicker. It's as opposed to those freezing days when you slide through life there on the ice. Here you kind of have to push your way through the
Mosquitoes?
swamp area. The mosquitoes, the humidity. It's thick with that. And so South Florida and North Florida are very different kind of places. Where I live, it's much more like, say, South Georgia, because we're at the northeastern corner of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to say that I write the dark side of the Sunshine State. Less irony, less humor, longer sentences, more build-up time. The crime pretty early on, but there's maybe a more interwoven fabric to those books here. Every book I write, I try to do something different. Every one I try to experiment with different kinds of approaches, but that's the big difference.
All right. Now, one thing I do find, and it depends on the story, is like, do you write in a third person or a first person? Because like there's an author and he does fantasy, so completely different genre, but some of his stories he's written where it's the main characters telling the story, everything's going through. It's how do I do this? He's doing that, all from his perspective.
Right.
I'm doing an audiobook of another one now where the same author, everything's in third person, which gives the overview, the narrator knows everything that's happening kind of a view. Do you follow along with one way of writing, or do you kind of experiment with first person, third person, and I hope not second person, because that's just...
No second person. I haven't done the second person and don't plan to. Yeah, it is a mix and an experimental, and it's driven by the story. And so my first series, first person, second series, which again is the one that focuses on the homicide detective. He's never a narrator, but other characters in the books do narrate those. And so again, first person. The Sam Kelson books, partly because he suffers from disinhibition, which it's really, really important for me to make sure that no one ever, he's not somebody you laugh at, but for him to take charge of his world in ways that we can credit him, or that there's never any question about crediting him for full agency, full control of what he's doing. If I had put this as a first person kind of a tale, in many ways he's very unreliable, right? Because you don't know what he's going to say and how his own self-perceptions are. And so in a way, then we'd be asked to align ourselves with him. I wrote, those three books are all third person. And so he gets to say what he says. Other people get to react to him. He gets to control it. And so we're not, I like to think that we credit him, in different ways from how we might otherwise. And then the Frankie Dash books, once again, first person. So I mostly do first person, but I also do some third.
All right. Now, you keep mentioning that your series have been trilogies. Are you planning on expanding them, or are you the type of person that it's 3, then done, and then I move on to something else, or I kind of branch off of what I've written?
Right. It all depends on what story I want to tell. I'll tell you, the Sam Kelson books I've really enjoyed writing. And I also publish a lot of short stories with Sam Kelson as a character, as the character. He works really nicely in the short form as well as the long form. And so he's somebody I definitely can see continuing with. Frankie Dash, again, this guy who's, he's really been beaten up by the system.
Hmm.
I couldn't, when I wrote that first one, I thought, one, I can't see him ever doing another kind of, facing a challenge. He's had enough challenge in his life.
Right.
Um, and two, I was exhausted by writing that book. One of the to me, one of the biggest horrors is to be accused of something that I haven't done, and to be punished for it. If I do something, punish me away. I'll take blame for it. I'll take responsibility for it. But the idea of, say, an 18, 19-year-old young guy, and this is, frequently in real life, this is that
Hmm.
story, who gets accused of something that is just brutal, brutal, and hasn't done it. The idea of somebody, spending the next 10, sometimes 20 years or more in prison, and nobody believing that person. To me, that's a horrifying story. So I was exhausted by the time that I wrote that. And it took me a while before I wanted to come back and do that again. I'm in no rush to write a third one with him, but I will if I have a story that would depend on, that he would do that. It's mostly the Kelson ones that I could see developing further. I would never say never to any of the other ones, but
Right.
no, it's not. In each case, I didn't have a set out plan to write three. I just started writing the stories, and then when I wanted to try something else, I tried something else.
All right. Now with the Sam Kelson one. So with that there, Sam Kelson is the one where he has the inability to lie, correct?
Right.
And forgive me, there's certain words that I just can't pronounce properly, so I quit trying. So, but with his inability to lie, with not able to lie, does he kind of build up a sense of humor in the way he answers stuff there, or is it because I can see one without calling me funny, everyone lies one way or another, intentionally or not, or even if you're like, okay, well, like my son, I'll tell him something every now and then, like, hey, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy. I mean, they're harmless things that you don't, and what so have you. But in general, not being able to lie seems like it would be one a good thing, but also it'd be a horrible thing to have to deal with. Do you?
Yes.
So how when you started talking about that, it just kept sticking out of my head is how do you go through life? And it's not saying you have to lie to everything to get through, but not having the ability to filter what you want to say and you just come out and say everything honestly or truthful can be, especially as a cop or investigator or anything like that. How do you address him dealing with that? What kind of personality does he end up developing with that disadvantage?
Right. No, and real nice question. And part of the answer, I mean, this is a real condition. This is a real kind of a
Right.
situation. And people with disinhibition, frequently they will act out in ways that can be, there can be some violence, there can be some real antagonism. It's not at all unusual for it to be very sexual. And because again, this is fiction, it's important for that not to be something that stands out. And so he'll say things that, if he's attracted to somebody, that person's going to know it.
Right.
If he has certain kinds of habits that are built into a kind of compulsive behavior that he's going to do, that he's going to engage in. And for me, the real important line here was to write about him as somebody who is extraordinarily recognizable in all of us.
Hmm.
Which is to say that, you got, you've talked about your son talking about, the Santa Claus, but I've got kids who are now in their young 20s, and going through those teenage years. Every parent, I won't say every parent, but many parents, we say things that just mortify them out in public, right? Which is
Right.
to say that we're opening our mouths and we're speaking not to tell lies, but we're speaking the truth as we know it. and we're saying whatever it is, and the kids melt, right? The kids are just destroyed by this, and so they want us to be more inhibited. And so I think that in most of us, we have these moments where you think, all right, I shouldn't have said that, right? Some of us, it's a daily basis. Sometimes some people live their lives that way. And then, of course, there can be the kind of thing where neurologically, cognitively, there's no choice. For me, what I want to really to do is to accentuate, what is recognizable in all of us. For him never for him to be somebody we say, oh, this poor victim, but also for never him to be somebody we say, oh, this guy is pathetic. But instead to have him, differently abled, to use a kind of a, common kind of a term, and fully powerful. He has lost his marriage. He has lost. He got, the injury came when he was working undercover as a narcotics cop. He's lost his job. Not many people can bear to be around him. But he's got an extraordinarily big heart. 99% of what comes out of his mouth, because this is who he is, even if it's embarrassing, is lovable, I hope.
Right.
And so he says some things, but it's I hope that it is rarely, if ever, something that somebody takes offense to, or if they take offense to it, they're looking at him and saying, he shouldn't have said that. Not, and it's not as if it's personal. And so it's a hard, for me, he's been in, this is one of the reasons I love writing about him, is he's really, really hard to write. Somebody who, I'm always aiming for that balance, which is a very difficult balance between him being somebody we know has limits, but we also know that he's powerfully smart, fast, funny, lovable. The quick way to think about maybe comparisons is, let's talk about Sherlock Holmes. What are his? And he's got the opium addiction. Mentally he's a little out there.
Right.
So some of the most famous, Holmes is just the first and most obvious of them. But there's huge numbers of detectives who either have whatever kind of limitation, something working against them, but at the same time, part of the pleasure is seeing them work with that, not so much overcoming it, but working with their limits so as to make things happen. That's who Sam is.
Okay. Well, he sounds like he'd be an interesting person to read, just trying to follow along, and because it doesn't sound like he's somebody that most people would generally relate to with that kind of situation.
But I think that we do, though. That's my point. Is if I'm doing it well, and I won't claim one way or another, but if I'm doing it the way that I want to, we do relate to him, because we say, all right, I don't want him, necessarily at my next dinner party, and I recognize, part of me at that dinner party is not saying the stuff that he does say a little too often, and that many people are, we're on our good behavior, and his good behavior doesn't stop here, it goes to here or here, but at the same time, I hope we do recognize ourselves.
All right, so which makes sense. Now, do you have anything really you're coming up with next that you're planning on, or is it kind of you're just taking a breath because you said Frank, the last one that you just wrote, the Frank Dust, is it Dastard?
Dast. Just D-A-S-T, right.
So
Dast.
Frankie Dast, or Frank Dast, with him, you said it was very exhausting to write his story. And right now you're not looking to continue on with that unless you get requests and what so have you. Now, are you looking at a new series to start, or what are you looking at doing?
So even when I'm exhausted, and this is true, I think of a lot of writers, certainly a lot of the writers whose work and whose processes I deeply admire. when we're exhausted, instead of putting down or instead of turning off the computer, we just type a different story, or we shift modes. And so,
Right.
yeah, his stories are tiring, but yes, I'm writing other things. I pretty much write every day,
All right.
I'm working every day, and that includes, the day after I type the end on one book, the next day it's, once upon a time, right? It's that kind of an approach. And so, yes, I'm working on other things, experimenting with some things that I haven't done before. While I've written a good number of short stories with Sam Kelson in them, and some of those are out, some of them are in the mill to be coming out from magazines and anthologies. And then I'm also writing some works that I intend fully to be standalones, not series, but bigger books, books that aren't so much set in Florida or set in Chicago, but have bigger landscapes, bigger stories, more wheels turning, a bigger clock.
All right. So let me ask this then. With you mentioning Chicago and all the different locations, do you actually know the locations? It sounds like you're writing about the locations you currently live in, is how it's going. But do you write in areas that you're not familiar with and things like that, or is it the area so you can write like Johnny's Pizza Shop was on the corner when he passed such a street and such a street?
Right. Yeah. Mostly it's I know the places really well. And not 100% of the time. Sometimes I'll go and I'll visit. In fact, I do visit the places I'm writing about, even if I've driven by them 100 times. I want to see the detail that makes a place particular, right? We can all go by Johnny's Pizza Shop 100 times, and we can say there was a pizza shop on the corner. But what makes this pizza shop specifically Johnny's? That always interests me. And my books, mostly, the ones that are out at this point, they are largely ones that people look at, and I will have I'll have readers writing to me saying, "Oh, I know exactly where that is. I know exactly where that is." That's interesting to me, and an important one. And I'll say further that there are books by writers whose work I love, who I've never been, say, for example, to New Iberia in Louisiana, but I've read extensively about the town from James Lee Burke's books, and I know that if I go to New Iberia sometime, I will see the whole town through the lens of that book. So it goes both ways, right? Yes, it's particular to it, but then also when somebody else goes to Johnny or John's Pizza Shop, they say, "I never noticed that thing before," but yeah, that is, why is that thing hanging? Why is there a piñata in the corner? Or whatever it is that makes that pizza shop specific. Those are the things that I really love. So yeah, particular.
I understand. And, I used to travel the country for 15 years, literally working 7 days a week doing it. And you want to talk about burnout there. But one thing is with all that travel, I got to read quite a bit of different types of books. And I always found it interesting when I'd be in one of the cities, because most of it was written in about big cities and things like that. So you would read something, you're like, oh, I remember this from that book. I always found that interesting kind of a thing as well. So,
Sure.
So what's pushing you to keep writing in the sense of you already have, I believe it's 11 books out now. So, and then several short stories you're writing. Everybody seems, once you start writing and start getting going, everyone seems to have a different little driving factor to want to write more stories. What's kind of yours in that sense that makes you want to write more?
The main thing for me is what it's been from the very beginning, or not from the very beginning, but from early on, which is a huge curiosity to know the way that people think, and the way that people behave. The contradictions. We were talking before about people who are false, incarcerated for crimes that they haven't committed. And sometimes there have been false confessions that have been coerced, but on occasion there have been false confessions that have been fairly voluntary. What leads a person to do that and to realize too late that it's happened? Of course, the coercion, interests me as well. What could possibly motivate somebody to coerce somebody to confess to a crime that maybe we know that person, the coercing person, knows the accused didn't commit. What causes somebody to become so angry that say a murder might occur or something along those lines? What causes somebody to be so hungry to get justice that a whole lifetime, despite the extraordinary costs of pursuing justice, that a whole life is spent, pursuing it? These things really, really interest me. They interest me in others, to the degree that I share any of the strong kinds of moments of anger or happiness or desire. These are the things that really fascinate me, and so I love to explore them. And the reality is that whether one is writing about, say, murder, or the kind of the other end of crime fiction is cozies, stealing a strawberry pie, and who did it? The old lady who makes quilts, right? Whatever these are, they draw in many ways upon the same, again, shared experience. And so writing about murder, writing about major thefts, writing about injustices, and all of these kinds of things, every one of us, maybe there's some exception, but I think every one of us has experienced anger. Every one of us has experienced fear. Every one of us has experienced strong desire, and just keep on going down the line. And so
Right.
what happens when we put those mutual experiences, I want to say universal experiences virtually, and we put those into extreme circumstances? What happens when we do that? And so something really, really, is angering, something that can't be fixed easily. And those are the situations, in which, regular people, potentially regular people, perform some extraordinary acts, whether acts of evil or acts of good, or, somewhere in between. Those are the ones that keep me writing. I want to say, what would happen if, or, what is this kind of mental state or desire or emotional state that I experience, I see other people experiencing, and what is it that makes this person, when would that really become a problem or a virtue? Or conversely, how could somebody do what that person has done? Not to say a sociopath or psychopath, not somebody who,
Right.
Has other things going on, but how could a person, kill another person? How could a person willfully hurt somebody? How could a person do all of these kinds of things? Those are the ones that, and I won't say they keep me up at night. They don't keep me up at night because I'm writing about them all day.
Right. Understandable. So let me do this. I don't want to take up your whole day with your stories. I have a ton of other questions, and I know if I start digging into them, we're just going to keep talking. And next thing you know, it's a 3 or 4 hour recording, and people's going to be wondering when it ends. So here's what I think is going to be the best solution for that: is any questions that somebody doesn't feel I asked, if they want to ask you, other than the profile I have on you on authorblurb.com, where people can go read the information you've given me, check out your links, where do you prefer them to reach out to you if they have more questions than I asked, or if they want to find out more about you?
Two places are probably the best for me right now. Well, one of them is my website, which is www.michaelwileyonline.com. So just, very, very, straightforward. Michael Wiley is not unusual name. There are football players, basketball players, all kinds of people with it. So at the website, that's that. And the other one is I do use Facebook as my main social media, for a wide variety of reasons. But that's you can find me on Facebook as well.
All right, perfect. Well, again, I'm very appreciative that you came on. I've enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully all the readers that are listening to this runs out, buys all your books, and keeps buying them as you put them out. So thank you, Michael, for being here. Like I said, I greatly appreciate it. If you can hold on for me for just a moment, I'm going to end this for everybody else, but you and I will talk a little bit more.
Sounds great. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You can go to authorblurb.com where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.